Hello again. The Practical Animal Channel is dedicated to the public understanding of conservation, aiming to give students and career breakers tips that may just give you the edge you need to land that dream animal job. If you want to work with iconic animals, you need to have hope that you can contribute something. It's not all known, and later in this programme we will be identifying knowledge gaps in South African veterinary conservation. Dr. Mike Toft talks with me about the skills needed to be a wildlife vet in the bush, including general principles such as the extensive conservation unit, One Health, and non-interventionist wildlife management. Conservation is not for the squeamish, and neither is this programme. Being a conservation vet and living the wildlife looks like this. Mike, what's your most treasured possession in your field kit?
My dart gun. I use it obviously for every single immobilization that we do.
Mike, how challenging is it for a person, say, from North America or Britain or Western Europe, who has been bitten by the bug and wants to practice wildlife veterinary medicine in South Africa? Can they just move out there?
No, it's actually very difficult. From Britain and some of the EU, you can come straight out here, register with the council, and obviously go find yourself somebody to teach you how to do it. From North America, a whole different story. You have to write your exams. They have, just like when we go to the States, we can't just move in there and do anything veterinary-wise. We have to write exams too. So it's a reciprocal sort of arrangement. They would have to write all of their veterinary exams, and that's not just wildlife. They would have to do the small animal, the domestics, the works. So not easy for a North American to come to South Africa, and vice versa, not easy for a South African to go to North America. From Britain and quite a lot of the EU, not so difficult, can be done.
There are students coming over to South Africa, I imagine, from British veterinary schools to do work experience or shadowing vets in South Africa. What sort of challenges do they face when they're not from the region?
There's a number of challenges. First of all, the reality of how we practice wildlife medicine here as opposed to what they've learned in the universities. Out in the field, it's very different to what it is that they've learned. The universities make it very difficult. We've had a number of them come through. Some have been, it's been great and it's been a lot of fun, but they make the insurance requirements for the students and some of the health and safety issues exceptionally onerous on us as veterinarians here in South Africa, which generally means that we then have to keep our students well away from the cold face whilst we're working. They stand back as very much observers as opposed to participators. As I'm sure you know, the drugs we use are incredibly powerful. There are a lot of potentially dangerous elements, and the wildlife that we deal with are all potentially very dangerous, some of them anyway.
I get the impression, Mike, that in South Africa, treating wildlife is a totally different ball game. I mean, you've got game parks, you've got national parks. Am I right in thinking that there's industries out there that, you know, the average British person has no experience of?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's why they come here. If you want to learn about wildlife in a zoo situation, you can do that in Britain quite comfortably and easily, and you'll get all the training you need there. But if you come out here and you're working in the field, it is an absolutely different set of criteria here that we have to use. It's one of the reasons why they need to come here if they want to deal with African wildlife, is to learn the reality of what it's really about and like.
How does it differ? What in being in the field? What comes over as being the biggest challenge for those who are not used to it?
The sheer size of the animals that we deal with, the fact that they are not nailed down to a spot, that we have to sometimes look for them for hours on end, that we have to use incredibly powerful drugs to immobilize them, and then we have to manage each and every case very differently to the way it's managed, say, in a university. First of all, you need to know how to handle a firearm, because a dart gun is not much different to most firearms. You've got to be comfortable shooting darts at animals and how long it's going to take for it to immobilize, and what to expect when it is immobilized, and how to deal with the situations that arise, which they do, obviously, because it's an uncontrolled situation. You have an animal that's running in a wild environment. It can fall in rivers, it can go over cliffs, it can go down burrows, it can end up in trees. In other words, you don't have the control and the safety factors that you do in normal practice.
How would you describe the practice of wildlife veterinary medicine in KwaZulu-Natal today?
South Africa is divided into various provinces. KwaZulu-Natal, we have what we call extensive conservation models. In other words, these are large reserves where the animals run basically wild. We try and allow them to fulfill their wildness. Now, in other provinces of South Africa, there's wildlife that are dealt with, but in a far more commercially farmed situation where they're producing numbers of animals, they're looking for certain sizes of horns and things like that. So our type of conservation here and our work is extensive conservation. We don't interfere unless we have to. And that's the difference. We don't go out just because it's got a cut on its foot or its head or its whatever and try and fix it. Most things will repair themselves. So what we do is we learn to manage the stuff in the field. And the other big challenge that I didn't go into just now is that when you get to treat a wild animal in the wild, you often only get one chance at fixing it. You don't stick a bandage on and have it on a drip and change that for the next 5 to 10 days in a hospital situation. You get one-off chance. The next time you want to deal with it, you're going to have to knock it down again. In other words, you don't have them sitting and standing accepting treatment. You've got to knock them down each and every time. And that poses a lot of problems with certain species, that's for sure.
Such as you have to sort of accurately estimate at a distance body weight, for example, for working out dosages?
Oh, very much so. That comes with experience, basically. Some drugs there's some leeway, and some drugs there's no leeway.
Mike, what are the principles of avian surgical sexing? What's it about?
A lot of people keep exotic parrots. They are usually endangered species, a lot of them. Things like Spix macaws, hyacinth macaws, leadbeater cockatoos, palm cockatoos, those sort of things. From all over the world, they're bred in captivity. There's a good deal of money involved in it. And as you know, most birds look the same, both male and female. A lot of them do not look any different. So surgical sexing was a very quick way of inserting a laparoscope just in front of the hip joint, behind the last rib, straight into the abdomen, where you could visualize the ovary or the testes, and you could visually sex that bird as either a male or a female. It was before the days of DNA sexing, where you could take a drop of blood now, have it checked. And I think that supersedes a lot of what we used to do in those days, the surgical sexing story now. You can do it through DNA and blood. It's expensive, though. It's still cheaper to do it from a surgical point of view, but there's bigger risks. You need an anesthetic to do it, and and the like. So that's what that's about.
What skills and personal qualities does it take to be a wildlife veterinarian in South Africa?
It's a job you're going to need a passion for. if you're looking for a financial reward from your work, in other words, a good income from it, you're not likely to get it from wildlife. It is probably one of our poorer paid branches of our profession. And most of us do it for the passion of what we do and for the conservation that we believe we're contributing to. A good deal of it is based on one's passion and love for wildlife, to be honest, and about making a difference. And then, of course, there is this whole One Health scenario, One Health aspect to wildlife that forms a very important part. In other words, healthy animals, healthy domestic animals, healthy humans, healthy environment, healthy wildlife. So again, if you're interested in the One Health situation, wildlife is a wonderful place to be in, but don't expect to walk away from it well remunerated. You're not going to be. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge is you need to be able to take a situation, adapt what's in your hands and around you at a time, and deal with an animal as such. Often you don't have all of this equipment that you would have in your clinics and the likes at hand. And secondly, there's not always somebody who's done what you've done. Sometimes you're at the very cutting edge of the technology, and as such, you've got to be able to innovate.
Mike, do you have students or new graduates coming to you for job interviews or internship interviews, or is it all done remotely? And what should students wear for an interview?
Somebody who dresses look like they're about to do something work-wise, and not fashion-wise. I probably would use that as a criteria.
What's a good question that students or new graduates can ask when they are in an interview with a veterinary practice?
The first one isn't how much am I going to earn. Second one is, do I get a car? That's not going to help you either. How much time off do I get is not going to help you. The best way is to ask, what does the work entail? What is it about? What will I learn from it?
Mike, how did your own career develop?
Oh, over many, many years. I started off born in Kenya. So my dad was initially in the police, but we were then in the tourism and hunting industry for a long time. So, of course, we were very much involved with wildlife. We owned a wildlife ranch next to Tsavo National Park. So that piqued my interest in wildlife. But as with any wildlife job, you've got to learn to be a proper vet first. When I say proper vet, you need to go and do your dogs and cats, your horses and your cows. Once you've got the experience and the feel for both surgery and medicine in your domestic animals, then come and be a wildlife vet, because then you've got the background. Now, that's exactly what I did. I've worked in mixed practices over the years, did horse racing, hound racing, you name it, dairy cattle, beef cattle, and slowly started building up my wildlife repertoire until eventually I was able to move completely into wildlife. So that's how my career started. It started in Kenya, moved down to Zimbabwe. From Zimbabwe, I moved to South Africa. And from here, South Africa, I moved up to Zululand, where I am now, obviously in full-time wildlife work.
Where do our knowledge gaps lie in terms of wildlife veterinary medicine and its practice in South Africa?
I think the intensive management of wildlife is probably where our most knowledge gaps lie. It's the translocation of these species from one country to another that I think we still have to learn, what it is that's going to be required to make it a successful transfer. Those are probably one of our biggest. And then, of course, there are knowledge gaps in the disease processes that are active in the field. We're still finding new diseases all the time. And as you know, the next sort of big pandemic is likely to come from some form of wildlife species too. So, I think that's where the challenges lie for the future.
In Britain at the moment, there's an awful, in conservation biology, there's an awful lot of rewilding going on. Is that happening in South Africa?
Indeed, yeah. One of our biggest projects at the moment is rewilding 2,000 odd rhino that have been in domestic or in a intensive breeding captivity situation that eventually didn't work out, and they've now got to be rewilded back to the environment. So we've got an endangered species that we are trying to rewild. We also deal with a lot of cheetah work, which also requires can be bred quite well in captivity, but getting them back into the wild is a big challenge. So that's another issue, a rewilding issue as such.
How do those rewilding processes differ between cheetah and rhino?
Cheetah, you got to teach them to hunt. That's something they would have learned from their mothers. Rhino, it's more about adapting them to the environments and doing it slowly. In other words, exposing them to ticks, flies, diseases, heat, humidity, things that they haven't been used to for a while. So it's more environmental with the rhino, and it's more behavioral with the predators.
Mike, how do you go about doing nighttime nyala capture? Again, something that cropped up in our correspondence.
Typically, it involves driving around on a quad bike with a dart gun and with an assistant on the back with you. Using a spotlight, we used to obviously locate nyala. We would use tracking darts that have a radio transmitter and a small flashing LED. We would dart the animals, and then we would follow the radio signal and the flashing light to find them. It's physically very challenging. It's exceptionally dangerous. You bump into lions and rhinos and all sorts of things in the middle of the night whilst you're chasing them around.
Mike, what have been your biggest influences, books or people or meetings?
Dr. Dave Cooper. Dave Cooper was the head of KZN Wildlife, which is our national parks here. He'd been in the parks for 20 odd years. Very knowledgeable, very approachable. Much like myself, he'd come up through the small animal, cattle, horses, and moved to wildlife. And yeah, he was certainly one of my more influential guys. Then one of the other blokes was from Johanesburg, Professor Burrows, Richard Burrows, also based down here in KZN in his younger days. Went to the university. I did a wildlife course, an MMed vet with him at the university. And yeah, and I suppose the third person would be someone who also is quite well known in the wildlife field, and that's Prof. Leith. So yeah, those are the sort of people that I've lent on and looked up to and have helped me through my career. Oh, and the other guy needs mentioning is Adrian Tordorf, Prof. Tordorf, good friend of mine, but very knowledgeable in the cheetah world. He's done a lot of research. Leith Mayer, he's done a lot of research on wildlife chemical immobilization and stuff like that, and he knows a lot about the physiology. So yeah, we've been very privileged in this country to have guys, very influential guys who've all helped mold our careers as we've gone along.
Mike, is there anything you'd like to add?
If we're looking and talking to young aspiring wildlife vets, for them not to put their wildlife aspirations down, but to concentrate on their general veterinary skills, bone those up to a point that they've got the skill to be able to handle the wildlife in the field, because they're just not going to learn on wildlife. And I can't emphasize that enough, because we get so many of them who come straight out of university and think that they're going to be a wildlife expert, and it's just not going to happen. Certainly not a field expert. If you want to go into a zoo situation, different story. You'll certainly get a chance to learn there. That is a totally different field altogether.
Mike, you're a wildlife vet in South Africa. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animals channel. Dr. Mike Toft.
You're welcome. Thank you.